will be increasingly constrained. So as an example, hitting your child, so using corporal punishment. There's overwhelming scientific research to show that that is something that is not conducive to human well-being because it makes children more aggressive. And so then we could say if there's an overwhelming amount of scientific research to show that a certain type of behavior is going to cause more long-term suffering, then it's hard to then say that that is moral.
The thing is, science bases its model primarily on induction. And induction, again, is a very limited process. It's observations, and those observations continuously change. Yes, indeed, that research might be there, but the research to suggest even when we started speaking as a species, there was like a standard kind of agreement just a couple of days ago. There's a research that's come out saying no, it's actually 7 times further back. So it's constantly going to change. And that's why I say when it comes to objective morality, science itself is a model based upon... So she's preaching Christianity.
I know, it's very interesting. I'm not sure if Jesus would approve.
I agree. If he said give the other cheek, I don't think that's exactly indicative of that. So yeah, because science is something that's induction. At
the age of 56, he married a 9-year-old child.
Science is based upon induction. Induction is based upon your observations.
Thank you. That's all right.
So based upon morality is something, would you say that morality is constantly...
Sorry, can I just touch back on your point about how new scientific evidence came out disproving previous scientific evidence? And I think that that's an important point. And
the morality changes as well, according to you.
But I don't think necessarily that means morality changes, because what I would say is that that is just evidence. Like, there's a difference between answers in practice and answers in principle. So just because science is pointing to a certain answer right now doesn't necessarily mean that it's the correct answer. Like, you're right, we might do further, research and discover that actually what we thought was wrong. But it's not that there wasn't an answer in principle, it's just that we hadn't done enough research to get to the right answer.
There's also one thing I also want to draw your attention towards as well, because you're correlating harm with wrong. Because you're saying if harm is being brought to so-and-so, that implies that it's wrong.
Well, not necessarily, and that's why I don't use the word harm, I use well-being, because I do think a certain amount of harm is necessary and good to well-being. Like, suffering is a necessary part of human existence, and I don't think all suffering is bad, if that makes sense.
But what I'm saying is, when it comes to science, science will base things upon harm. It will be based upon certain synapses firing. It will be based upon the temperature increasing. It will be based again on the material and on the physical. Science can, and it hasn't ever, and it won't, because it's not in the scope of science to say this is good, this is bad. It can say this can cause harm, and this will be conducive in terms of more hormones being produced or more endorphins being released, as it does with exercise, but it won't say that this is good, this is bad. You see, it's not a claim science makes, and that's why even in certain debates as well, this is not a claim that atheists necessarily defend. You're welcome to defend it, but to say that if I do an experiment, let me give you one simple example. If, for example, a baked cake was on my table and I had to use science to determine why it was made. Yeah, I can kind of look at the chemical construction of it and all that sort of stuff. However, it would never be able to tell me why it was made or if it was made for a good reason. That can only be, that's a moral stance, that's a metaphysical stance. That can only be given by my aunt, who can come and say, I baked that for you, this was my intention. But if I'm just to use science, just to use...
Right, and I agree with you there. Fantastic. So I don't think science can tell you whether something is good or something is bad, but I think science can tell you whether or not something is conducive to well-being.
Yeah.
And then if you believe, which is my personal belief, that human well-being should be kind of a measure for whether or not something is moral or immoral, then you can use science as a tool for morality. But it's not that I'm saying that science
should we
on,
just
on
move
its
over
own.
here? Is that okay?
Yeah. It's not that I'm saying that science on its own says good or bad.
Yeah.
It's that science can provide us answers as to whether or not, like I said.
Science, it definitely contributes to the discussion. 100%, I agree with you. Like science can definitely tell us if this thing is helpful and beneficial, like you're alluding to, this individual. However, to say this is good, this is bad, science doesn't necessarily claim that. Of course, it's helpful to the conversation,
Right.
but to say that it has moral stances, it doesn't.
No, and I agree. I don't think science has moral stances. What I'm saying is that science can be used as a tool to
Pedophile Muhammad, he lied about Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the life and the
life. Is whether something is, like I said, conducive to well-being or whether it's not.
Jesus is the way, the
And
truth, and the
science
life.
is used as a
Jesus is the way, the truth,
Science is definitely helpful. It's definitely helpful. But if, for example, you know the example of the Roman Colosseum, where you'd have a Christian there, and that's so annoying.
Jesus is the life and the
So,
resurrection. Jesus is the good shepherd.
Yeah, that's why
Jesus
we
is
have
the
to
God
repeat
of
stuff again
Abraham,
and again.
Isaac, and Jacob.
So,
Jesus is that Yahweh.
yeah, so the Roman
great
Colosseum,
I am, the Alpha
you
and
had
Omega.
a Christian there
Muhammad, the
who would be
pedophile.
harmed
Don't touch me, don't touch me,
for the
don't
benefit
touch me.
of the whole
Don't touch
crowd.
me, I will hit you.
So
I will
if
hit
you
don't
balance
touch me.
pleasure over pain, the pain of one
Jesus is the
individual
way, the truth,
over
and
the
life.
pleasure of
Jesus is the life and the
numerous
resurrection.
people,
Jesus is
that
the life and the
society would say,
resurrection.
you know what,
Jesus
that's
is
good.
the way,
And
the
according to
truth, and the
science,
life.
they can use
Jesus is
science.
the life
I
and
mean,
the
eugenics has been
resurrection.
used as well.
Jesus
But
is
Eugenics is
Lord
used incorrectly.
of the heaven and the
exactly,
earth.
do you see? But
The
science
Alpha
was
and
still
the
used.
Omega,
No, but the science was
beginning
wrong.
and the
That's
end.
my point.
Jesus
The science
is
was
the
wrong.
God of the heaven
Like
and the
people
earth.
were using
Jesus is coming
fake
again.
research, basically.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example.
Muhammad, the
So you'll have
pedophile,
data.
he lied
That data now
about
are
my
using
Jesus
Bayesian
Christ.
probability,
Muhammad,
are
the
using
pedophile, he
regression,
lied about my Jesus
are using
Christ. My Jesus Christ
freedom
is
to
God
exclude
of the heaven and the earth.
outliers,
Jesus
etc.
Christ
There's
is
certain models
Almighty
that you can
God,
use to
everlasting
interpret
Father,
certain
and
data,
Prince of Peace.
and
The
different people might
pedophile
come to different
Muhammad,
conclusions,
the
as we know,
pedophile asshole, he
from the
lied
Amgen
about my
study
Jesus
and
Christ.
where they were looked at, and different, even though they were peer reviewed, when the data was looked at, certain experts came to different kind of conclusions. So again, science provides the raw data, and then it relies on certain individuals how they're going to interpret that data. Because again, I'm sure you'd agree, science depends on human interpretation.
But do you think, so for example, with the data, do you think that in principle, not is there somebody out there who can correctly interpret the data, but do you think in principle, out there is a correct way to interpret that data?
I think that correct way, there's to say that there's a correct way would mean that human has no biases, has
No,
unlimited funding.
Not even can a human do it. Just in principle, is there a correct interpretation of the data?
Objectively, when you're using science, are you talking about science based upon induction, or are you talking about science if we had all of the data in the world, what would we? Because I believe if you had all of the data, then you naturally come to an informed position. However, when you base it upon your limited observations, as had happened at the time of Isaac Newton, and then he was abrogated by Einstein based upon more observations that came in, and he was again is somewhat being abrogated by quantum mechanics, because we're having more and more observations. Do you see?
Yeah, so I think we both agree, though, there is an answer in principle. Like you said, if we were able to compute all of the data...
unrealistic principle, if we had all of the...
I'm not even claiming that we can get there, that it's even possible to know, but I'm saying in principle that answer exists.
Fantastic.
I'm not saying we will ever be capable of getting to that answer, but I think that answer does exist. And for me, I think we can get closer to that answer by using science. And for me, that is the
So science is a tool. I agree with you. Science is a tool that even we utilize as well. But to claim that science will give a conclusion that is objectively measurable, that's where I think we're on shaky ground here.
I think science can provide a conclusion an objectively correct conclusion in principle. Whether or not we can do that in practice, I don't know. But I think in principle it can. Because there is an answer out there. I'm not saying I will get the answer. I'm not saying we will ever get the answer.
Has it given an objectively measurable thing when it comes to morality, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I think that science has been able to give me a lot of answers as to things.
What one thing can we look at that you can say that's something that...
Well, the example I gave you earlier, like using corporal punishment.
But back in the days, there were also studies to suggest how beneficial that is. And certain people, there have been counter studies to that as well, to suggest how people that have gone through that, again, I'm not advocating for that because it's against the law here, but somebody that is going through that, there will be certain people saying, you know what, we've grown up with that and we're happier. If we didn't receive that, that would be an issue. And there is scientific research to back that as well. Do you see? So to say that there's something that objectively would be accepted, again, but let's put this on ice for now. We can come back to this.
But I would also say, like, for example, there are conspiracy theorists that come up with their own evidence as to why the earth is flat. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, I guess they're using their own version of science, but it doesn't mean that it's correct. And there are better answers and better research. And for me, I just try my hardest to find out whatever is the most credible and most objective evidence. And obviously that's really difficult to do.
It is, especially when it comes to certain scientists getting funding and the peer-reviewed process. And it's a lot of these things that can inherently be contaminated.
100%.
And then affecting us as well, because we would technically take the things that will confirmation bias, etc.
Yeah.
So this is a fantastic conversation. We can continue this, but like the brother started, I don't know where he's gone now. What he started with you was, do you accept that you exist and that I exist?
Yeah.
Okay. And then he said that there are 3 types of existences.
Yeah, he told me about that.
Yeah, the contingent existence, a necessary existence, and an impossible existence. So this is in modal logic, it's something accepted by Leibniz, Aristotle, etc., etc. Do you accept that premise? That there are 3 types of existence, or do you think there's another type of existence?
I'm not sure that I understood it fully.
Okay, no problem. Then, if I say it, just stop me in the middle. Don't be polite and just nod along and not understand it. You're more than welcome to just stop me and say, what did you mean by this or that? And I'll try my best to explain to you if I can. So, existence, because however skeptical you may be, the skeptic typically says, how do we know? Yeah, how do we know anything? Yeah. So Descartes, he says that, okay, at the very least, I think, therefore I am. Yeah, that was his kind of conclusion as to why he exists. Yeah, the fact that he's thinking that necessitates that he exists. He's alive. So in philosophy and in modal logic as well, there's 3 types of existence. You have contingent existence, which is a fancy way of saying something that depends on something else. There's certain criteria for that as well, which we can unpack later if you want. But for now, I don't want to inundate you with too much. If you ask for it, I can unpack it for you if you want. So something that's dependent, something which is independent, also called necessary, or something which is impossible. Yeah, like the law of non-contradiction, like a squared circle.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So as human beings, would you say that we are dependent or independent?
What do you mean?
It's dependent on things around you. Like human beings, we're dependent on air, we're dependent on water, we're dependent on sunlight, dependent on food and on sustenance.
Yeah.
So we're dependent. So we dependent on something else. That depends on something else, and it continues. Now philosophically, there's 2 options here. Either there is an end to that chain, or there's an infinite regress. You understand infinite regress? Yeah. So those are the 2 options. Which of those 2 options do you think makes the most rational sense?
Well,
Or is there another option?
I mean, I'm not sure, because even with infinity, I mean, the concept of infinity
We're talking not a mathematical infinity. We're talking about a practical infinity. And even when we're talking about infinity, the reason why infinite regress can't take place, let's just say if I'm about to throw something, Yeah, and I have to ask someone's permission, they have to ask someone's permission, they have to ask someone's permission. If it goes on for infinity, I'm not going to be able to throw that ball, am I?
Yeah.
Because there's no confirmation. So the mere fact that we exist means that there was an end to that chain, which in philosophy is called the necessary existence. Yeah, an end to that causal chain or contingent chain. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had an issue with the infinite thing. I don't want to go forward if you're a bit unsure of that. Should we unpack that a little bit?
That's okay. No, you can continue.
Okay, no problem. So what we would say is philosophically, logically, rationally, you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things. So for us to exist, the mere fact that we exist, there has to have been an end to that chain, which we say is a necessary existence. Now for us, does this argument make sense for you at the moment, logically?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So then we take it a step further. We say this necessary existence has to have been independent because it's the end to that chain. It's the end to that chain. Independency, it has to be pre and post eternal. Reason being, because everything depends on it, if that thing ceased to exist, then we would cease to exist and everything would be destroyed. Yeah, so the mere fact that we have a continuation, we're here, we have a continuation in our experience, that means we're not being destroyed, that means the necessary existence is still there. Yeah, it's not coming in and out of existence. Yeah, so pre and post eternal. I would also argue that it has a will. Reason being, because we were created in a particular moment. So when something is created in a particular moment, that means that a choice is being made. For example, a painter that's sitting in front of a canvas and he decides, that means that that person has an idea in mind, a choice is being made that they are painting something. Make sense? You're more than welcome to jump in. I don't want it to just be a monologue. So we said independent. One, because it's the end of the causal chain, doesn't beget nor is it begotten. Because it's the beginning, naturally it doesn't have something that it depends upon, and there's nothing like it naturally because everything else is contingent. That thing is necessary, i.e. anything that you see around you is dependent, it depends on something that doesn't depend. Now, as a Muslim, that's our definition of a God.
Yeah.
Yeah?